After beating Abyss and Oblivion, I went back to pushing Ascension and Hellclock, and I ended up using a marksman build to clear Hell level 50. The reason I call this a marksman build is because the relics which enable it are not tied to a specific skill. Instead, silver bullets and powder bag are tied to marksman skills. These are things like Phantom Marksman, Mata Diera, Repeater, and Split Shot. Of those, the ones that worked out for me were Split Shot and Repeater. And even at Ascension 50, I was surprised at how smooth Act 1 felt. On the other builds I was trying, Act 1, kind of a struggle. Even on Holy Rosary, it takes a little bit to get going, and the difficulty really does ramp up as you're starting to push those hell levels. On this, I won't say it was easy, but it certainly felt a lot more doable. Now, for a little bit of clarification, earlier I said you can do this on either Split Shot or Repeater. So the reason I mentioned those skills is you need a fire damage marksman skill. That way, when you add silver bullets, your skill does both fire and fizz. Powder bag causes an explosion when you hit an enemy that is ignited with physical damage from a marksman skill. Yes, the silver bullets does count as physical damage from a marksman skill for the purposes of triggering powder bag and causing the chain explosions. You can do this with Split Shot by default. As a note, you do not want to use the Blunderbuss relic. That will convert the damage from fire over to fizz, which means the whole loop breaks. On the other hand, for Repeater, you need the Molten Relic. Once you get it, you should be cruising because Repeater does like 2 million hits per second. Okay, it's not literally that high, but oh boy, is it a lot of hits, which makes this very easy to trigger. Which is also probably why I found the Repeater version to be more consistent. That said, if you're going with the Split Shot version, you can also give Split Shot to your minions, which is kind of funny. I don't think it's super practical. I think the self-attack version's better, but it is funny to watch all the minions using Split Shot. Now, at one point, I did have the idea to make a big old Ignite pool from Mata Diera, and then I was assuming I could spam physical Split Shot to do the whole thing without needing silver bullets. Problem with that, it's very unreliable, especially when enemies move out of a damage zone. So yeah, silver bullets and powder bag is actually the magic sauce here. A couple things that I did struggle with along the way. Mana was pretty tricky in Act 1 and Act 2. Once I was able to get the accessory that gave me more max mana, Act 3 mana was no problem at all. Act 1 and 2, it was a little bit of a struggle. Occasionally, I'd find myself running out and my DPS throttled as a result. I found, though, the bursts of damage when I did have mana was enough that I could still kill things. And the other thing that was a bit of a pain is enemies with conviction, as I noticed I needed to burn through their conviction before I could start igniting them and spamming the chain explosions. And so now that I've gone over some of the basics and the core mechanics, let's talk about the skills, relics, gear, passive, ascension stuff, and constellations. When it comes to Repeater, max the level. This is going to maximize your damage. Now, in the first and second act, you may run into some mana problems, but by Act 3, you can just get enough mana that it's not really an issue, at least from my experience. And as you can see by the affected by, yeah, this is where all your damage scaling comes from. The other skills are all defense or utility. Now, Prayer of Vengeance is an interesting one, because if you have garrison supplies, you want the level to be low enough that you can keep the active portion of a buff up for a significant amount of time. On the other hand, if you do not have garrison supplies, there is no reason, at least in my opinion, to not max it out for the biggest possible passive bonus. After all, you can just use the active on bosses and pretty much melt them. For me, this ended up being level 3. The exact level you go for is kind of going to depend on your attack rate, your cooldown, how many orbs you're generating, but somewhere around 2, 3, 4, probably the sweet spot. Now, one thing to note, you get plus 7.5% crit chance per rank here and plus 7.5% crit chance per rank here. So it's actually very easy to cap out your crit in a run, which does make the crit chance portion for Prayer of Vengeance to be less valuable. Therefore, you should prioritize crit damage blessings. And fun fact, you can also roll quite a lot of crit damage on Repeater. When it comes to Shadow Dash, I was using this primarily for mana sustain. I like having a movement skill. I also prefer Passage, but Passage gives 1.5% cooldown speed per rank. Shadow Dash gives minus 2.5% skill mana cost. As one note, ranks are not levels, so this is level 1 to minimize the cooldown. Ranks are what you get for putting blessings into this, so I would grab some blessings that do things like dash faster or reduce the cooldown. Closed Body, it is a go-to defensive skill. The higher the level, the more conviction you get per mana, but I usually find it's better to have consistent uptime as opposed to maxing out my conviction. So I went with level 3 because, again, that felt like a sweet spot. Judgment. Lowers enemy resistances. You can scale this to increase the effects of the Fire Res Shred. Lower res means you do more damage. As a note, the mana cost on this is quite high. In the early game, you probably won't be able to fully level it. In the late game, you should be able to, and it gives ailment duration per rank. Then there's Lasso, which I'm not using on my bar, but I am triggering via a relic, so I went ahead and leveled it up because the cooldown doesn't matter. And hey, might as well inflict a slightly bigger bleed for whatever that's worth. And so next up, now is a good time to talk about relics. The first important thing is Molten Relic. This converts all repeater damage to fire. If you did not have Molten Relic, but wanted to play something very similar, you can do so with Split Shot, since that is fire by default. As one note though, do not use Blunderbuss, because if you're using Blunderbuss, that converts Split Shot over to physical damage, which would break this whole setup. The idea is to get a marksman skill that deals fire damage, then add physical damage from silver bullets, where marksman skills drain a small amount of conviction on use and deal a percentage of your current conviction as additional fizz damage. This way, you deal both fire and fizz. The point of a fire is to ignite. The point of a fizz is to detonate the powder bag. So the higher rank of powder bag you can get, the better. That said, this run was not particularly lucky. I don't think my stuff was super good, and it was still also quite smooth. In terms of other unique relics to use, I recommend the Northerner Belt. Lasso is very good at grouping enemies, which means more overlapping explosions. And Garrison Supplies. During Prayer of Vengeance, you gain double your projectiles. Yes, the damage is reduced a little bit. It's totally fine. The damage reduction is fine. The projectile doubling is the most important part. When you have this, low level on Prayer of Vengeance, so you can keep uptime. If you do not have this, high level on Prayer of Vengeance for maximum bonus. Among the rare relics, I was really just wearing them for stats. As you can see, the critical hits with melee, I'm not using melee skills. This doesn't do anything. I did like the Fizz Res, Plague Res, and Experience Gain, though. Oh, and CDR. So a bunch of good stuff. Even Fizz damage isn't completely useless, as Silver Bullets does Fizz damage, though most of the damage is the Fire Explosion from Powder Bag. Now here, Repeater deals increased damage, but costs more mana. If you have a mana sustain for it, this is very good. If you do not have a mana sustain, you use something else. Marksman skills deal damage at close range, quite good. But unfortunately, the best modifier is not one that I found during my run. I found it on the kill right at the end of Act 3. So when I completed my Ascension, I had this nice shiny thing taunting me. Skill projectile amount. The more skill projectile amount you have, the more projectiles you fire with Repeater, which leads to more overlaps, more grenades, more ignites, more damage in general. Next up, we have gear. For the weapon, high base damage is good. Skill projectile amount is very good. If you can't get skill projectile amount, then a backup would be fire damage. Attack speed's also not terrible if you have the mana sustain. When it comes to rings, I quite like the base damage on the brass band here, the right ring. Main reason being it was in the early game before I got a bunch of buffs, but I was really struggling. That's when this is most impactful. On the other hand, this was an experiment. I thought, what if I took the crit chance ring to get my crit as high as possible? Don't do this. You just end up so crit overcapped from the skill ranks on Repeater and Prayer of Vengeance, but it is not worth it. But of course, I beat the Ascension on the run where I had this. Instead, go for an Ailment Chance ring. Ailment Chance ring, best in slot in your left ring slot. Then for the rest of the gear, it's pretty standard stuff. Go for evasion, endurance, resistances, all that. Conviction decay resistance on the shoulders is pretty good as well. I really liked the minus skill mana cost on the keepsake, and here I ended up going with max mana, just because it meant I could spam Repeater and not worry about my mana problems. When it comes to passives, how you spec this tree is going to vary a little bit based on what Ascension level you're at. Because I came up here first to get the 4th blessing, all that stuff. Then I came down to get damage and skill ranks. Then I started filling out the left side, going for things like red portal, skill mana cost, and crit chance. But I felt really, really squishy. And part of this is because I had a whole bunch of bonuses that set my resistances pretty far into the negatives. And early on, especially if you haven't leveled up many of your relics, it's pretty darn tough to actually get all your res. So I came all the way down to here, grabbed all resistance, grabbed some Fizz Res, and wrapped everything up with Second Wind. I think this is something that I should have done earlier. I did have all this for my Act 2 win, but I took a couple attempts in Act 2 before getting this where I was just getting one shot out of nowhere. Not only does Second Wind help prevent this, I'll get one shot, but then I have time to heal up, rebuild Conviction, lower the cooldown, all that fun stuff. But also resistances meant it triggered less often anyway. So really good defensive bonuses as you start pushing the Ascensions. And since this is a primarily Ascension-focused build, let me talk a little bit about what I took on the tree. So first, I started with Hell. Kind of have to take that. Then I grabbed all of Resistance weaknesses, and it came down here to new tricks. Bosses having extra mechanics hasn't been too bad from my experience. Oppression is kind of annoying till you get Fourth Blessing. Once you get Fourth Blessing, not too bad. Then I clicked Dangerous Foes. Elites have 1 affix, and then Dangerous Foes 2, which I'm pretty sure gives elites a second affix. And yes, you can click the beta work in progress nodes, you just don't quite know what they do. Then I clicked this and came down to Boss Enrage Timer, because I figured if I had enough DPS to melt the bosses before they enraged, it wasn't an issue. Here's where things get tricky, because there isn't that much left to take, and some of it is legit scary stuff. Like, depriving yourself of gold, pretty impactful from my experience. Also, making stuff faster, terrifying. Never had a worse time than when I clicked these and was unprepared for just how fast Act 1 enemies were. So instead, I clicked all of these. I think this means enemy AoE. I then clicked this. I wasn't doing plague damage anyway, so preventing enemies from being withered, not a big deal. This, I'm pretty sure, lowers the timer. Also didn't feel that bad to me. Then I clicked like this, Harsh Tide, lower the timer again. I clicked this. No idea what that does. And then I clicked Harsh Tide again, because again, I wasn't feeling all that much time pressure. Now, am I 100% sure of what modifiers I had? No, I am not sure at all. I just clicked stuff, and I ended up beating the run. Not being able to see what the modifiers are is kind of sketchy, but when I tried coming down here and just taking all the weaknesses, that felt way worse. So I decided, nope, not going to add an extra 25% negative res. It's pretty darn oppressive, especially in the early game. It felt like anything would one-tap me. Let's take a look at Constellations. And yeah, I have a bunch more points from beating the run. First thing, take the Discipline path, fill out all of this to start generating agility orbs. Next, fill out the entire marksman tree, which handily scales off of agility orbs. Since this build always uses marksman skills, it's a really good idea to fill out the marksman tree earlier rather than later, because there's a ton of damage bonuses here, including things like plus 100 base damage, which is really, really, really important in the early game. As a note, I didn't really take that much advantage of One Arrow Hunter. I was often getting closer to enemies rather than dealing with far away foes, but sometimes it just worked out, and I think it's still worth completing Constellation for the other bonuses. After that, I grabbed all of this for some mana regen, and all of this for the infinite cooldown recovery that is offered from Never Ending Cycle. This has pretty much become a staple on all of my builds. And then the most important thing after all that is to come over here to get Dawnlight. When you apply an Ignite, you gain a stack of Dawnlight. This is up to 40% multiplicative fire damage. In addition, 20% multiplicative Ignite damage seemed okay, but didn't actually end up feeling as impactful as I hoped. Because I'm doing high Ascension and I wanted a little bit more mana recovery, I filled out most of this. If you're wondering, why no Lightning Res branch? My Lightning Res was fine from Relics, so I didn't take it. Because at this point, I didn't really need the points to unlock other constellations. I also put a couple points here just to get the gold stuff and damage from picking up gold. Here, area damage, and then just might as well grab all the loot from the ground. It's 1 point. Then I came up here, grabbed +1 max agility orbs. Honestly, probably should have done this sooner. Probably should have done this around the time I filled out these nodes. But hey, I did it late. And then last up, I wasn't quite sure what to do for the rest of my points, so I grabbed all of St. George. I'm honestly not sure if the Fizz taken as fire does anything. The first 4 points, really solid. Fire res, fire damage, fire res. I mean, if you don't need fire res, those are less valuable, but I happen to get some use out of it. And then ignited enemies deal 12% less multiplicative damage to you. Really, really good defensive node, and because I was feeling squishy, that's what I decided to go with. All right, so playstyle and blessings. When it comes to repeater, the playstyle is pretty simple. Just right-click an enemy, left-click an enemy, hold down your trigger button on your controller, hold down the button that is bound to repeater until the enemy is dead. Okay, it's maybe not quite that simple. On bosses and tankier enemies, you should judge them, and you generally want to keep both Prayer of Vengeance and also Closed Body on cooldown as much as possible. The reason you want to keep them both on cooldown, you need to have at least some conviction, so constantly using Closed Body, really good way to generate it. And Prayer of Vengeance, if you have garrison supplies, doubles your projectiles, so you should definitely be using that as much as possible. Then last up, your movement skill is just for repositioning and getting out of the way of enemies. I definitely felt a little bit squishier on this build in comparison to the caster builds I played recently that have hundreds of thousands of conviction. When it comes to blessings, there are a couple of things to look out for. The first blessing that I was able to get pretty consistently was targeting base crit, into crit damage, into projectile skill damage, into double projectiles. Yes, this is another way to double projectiles. Then the other two things that stood out to me, finishing out the elemental damage path to lower enemies' fire resistance by 20% whenever you hit them. That's a pretty good one. And alternatively, finishing out the movement speed / evasion path, because it felt really, really good to get the extra movement speed and evasion for defenses. When it comes to skill blessings, the main thing that stood out to me was prioritizing critical strike damage over regular damage on repeater. In the very early game, Act 1, you probably don't have enough crit rate for the crit damage to outscale regular damage. However, the numbers on the crit damage are significantly higher than just the damage by about 50%. And remember, you are using two skills that give passive crit per rank. So it does not take that much base crit either from your tree, gear, or blessings to end up getting to 100% crit chance, especially since you can take a couple of increased crit chance blessings on your Prayer of Vengeance. So I found that heavily prioritizing crit damage was another really good way to scale DPS. In addition, if you don't think the base damage ring is worth it, you could go for crit damage here. That's really going to come down to if you get a high level or a low level base damage ring. If you get a low level one, it's like plus 30 base damage. I don't think that's worth it. I do think if you're talking about the 100 plus range, that's where it starts to be worth it. But crit damage isn't bad either. It's just that that stat gets a little bit saturated, so I'd rather have the base that is more effective in the early game when I'm lacking in stats. Now, as one last thing, I was curious. Does it matter if you have a ton of resolve or not? Because throughout my run, I didn't get that many ways to scale resolve. Yeah, I did have holy water, but it wasn't particularly well rolled. So I swapped over to my Oblivion file, where I have a really high level holy water, tons of extra conviction scaling, relics, you name it. And the end result is, yes, if you have a couple 100,000 conviction, you do indeed get higher DPS. But it wasn't actually as night and day different as I was expecting. Which leads me to believe that while you should go out of your way to get some conviction, if it is available, you don't need it if all you want is a successful run in Ascension. And so that is the build that I used to clear Ascension 50. It certainly felt very powerful, and I had a fun time doing it. With that said, I think I'm going to be done with builds in Hellclock for now. I want to do one more video wrapping up all the builds I've played and talking about them. If that interests you, do be sure to get subscribed. But after that, I'm going to call it good, as I want to see, number one, what do most of those Ascension nodes I've been clicking actually do? And number two, what sort of builds can be enabled by all the rest of the constellations? Because right now, Ascension has been in beta, and there's only a limited selection for the constellation tree. So I feel like I'm playing with a toolbox that is half empty, and I'd really like to play with a full thing if I continue to push into higher Ascensions. Now, that said, if you want to see some of the other builds that I've already played, maybe preempt that wrap-up video, you can check out both my Holy Rosary Summoner and Veil of Quills builds. Those will be up in the card and down below. The Rosary Summoner was nerfed recently. It is still quite strong. But that's going to be it for the build that took me to Ascension 50 and some of my thoughts on what worked and what to do differently next time. Thank you very much for watching to the end. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, and with that, I'll see you in the next one.